Infrastructure and Public Safety is being called to order. Alyssa, call the roll.
Senator Spitzwater.
Here.
Schnelting. Here. Brown. Gregory. Shore. Here. Washington. Weber.
Quorum being established, I move that we go into executive session. Having a second, all those in favor say aye. Aye, opposed no. The ayes have it. We are in executive session. I move that Senate Bill 669 be brought before the committee. Having a second, all those in favor say aye. Aye, opposed no. The ayes have it. The bill is before the committee. This bill is presented by Senator Gregory, David Gregory, and creates the offense of interference of a first responder. There is a substitute ending in .06C. The substitute adds the repeal of the Line of Duty Compensation Act sunset date and increases the compensation amount from $25K to $100K. This new substitute you just got, I think Alyssa talked to some of you about it. It also adds illness in the definition of killed in the line of duty. Is there any discussion on the underlying bill or substitute? Senator Weber.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to vote yes on this bill. I really do appreciate the sub, and I think that the one thing I just want to flag before we go to the floor, I am confident that legally speaking, videotaping an officer would not be covered by this bill because I think, as the sponsor points out, it says serving no legitimate purpose. So I think legally speaking, that's covered. I do think that just for functioning in society, if we could add something that specified that was not covered, I think that I would feel better about it. Because I think if you go to court, it's not going to, but I don't want that to happen. But I really do like what the sponsor did with the bill, and I just say I appreciate all the work on it. I think everything else is really good. I'm going to be voting yes, but I wanted to say that one piece. Thank you.
Further discussion on the substitute? Seeing none, I move that we adopt the substitute. All those in favor, after having a second, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. We've adopted the substitute. I now move that we vote Senate Committee substitute for Senate Bill 669 do pass. Do have a second? Having a second. Any further discussion? Let's call the roll.
Senator Spitzwater.
Aye.
Schnelting. Aye. Brown. Gregory. Shore. Aye. Washington. Weber. Aye.
By your vote of 4 aye and 0 no, you voted do pass that Senate Committee substitute. I now move that House Bill 225 be brought before the committee. I have a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The bill is before the committee. This bill is presented by Representative Myers and allows law enforcement agencies to request assistance from a law enforcement agency of another jurisdiction, and it states that police vehicles do not have to use their sirens and lights in certain situations. There is a substitute ending in .03C that was emailed to the committee. The substitute changes the title to Public Safety, and it incorporates provisions identical to House Bill 992 relating to criminal background checks, incorporates provisions of Senate Bill 192 relating to the Sheriff of St. Louis City. It incorporates provisions of the perfected Senate Bill 71 relating to college tuition for public safety personnel. It incorporates provisions similar to Senate Bill 143 relating to the Line of Duty Compensation Act. And it incorporates the provisions of Senate Bill 669 relating to the offense of interference with the first responder. And I will say, as we get House bills, we're going to have a couple opportunities at omnibus bills, and this is going to be an omnibus public safety bill. So just have that in the back of your mind why we're adding some of these provisions to have a discussion on a broad amount of public safety stuff. And the next one we'll do is a omnibus transportation bill. So any discussion on the substitute? Seeing none, all those in favor of the substitute signify by saying aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. We've adopted the substitute. I now move that we vote Senate Committee substitute for House Bill 225 do pass. Do have a second? Having a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, let's call the roll.
Senator Spitzwater.
Aye.
Schnelting. Aye. Brown. Gregory. Shore. Aye. Washington. Weber. Aye.
By your vote of 4 to 0, you voted do pass Senate Committee substitute for House Bill 225. I now move that House Committee substitute for House Bill 799, 334, 424, and 1069 be brought before the committee. Do I have a second? Having a second, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The bill is before the committee. This bill is presented by Representative Baker and has several provisions relating to motor vehicles. There is a substitute ending in .03C that was emailed to the committee. The substitute changes the title to transportation and incorporates provisions similar to or identical to the House-perfected House Bill 969 by Representative Knight relating to motorcycle or all-terrain vehicle franchisers and motor vehicles. And it deletes language specifying that licensed motor vehicle dealers who knowingly complete inspections with incorrect information shall be subject to disciplinary action by the DOR. Any discussion on that bill or that substitute? Seeing none, all those in favor of the substitute signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. We've adopted the substitute. I now move that Senate Committee substitute for House Committee substitute for House Bills 799, 334, 424, and 1069 be voted do pass. Do I have a second? Having a second, any further discussion? Seeing none, let's call the roll.
Senators Fitzwater.
Aye.
Schnelting. Brown. Gregory. Shore. Washington. Weber.
By your vote of 4-0, you voted do pass Senate Committee substitute for House Committee substitute for House Bills 799, 334, 424, and 1069. I now move that we exit executive session. Having a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. We're out of executive session. We're going to go into our public hearing, and we'll start with Senator Gregory if he's in the building. There he is. Proceed when you're ready. Ready, Senator, on Senate Bill 672.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. David Gregory, St. Louis County, Senate 15. Before you is Senate Bill 672, what I have named the Alexander Whalen Safe Highways Act. This Alexander Whalen Safe Highways Act is inspired by Dawn Whalen, who lost her son Alex to a wrong-way driver not long ago on westbound I-64 in Jefferson in St. Louis, Missouri. This act will mandate wrong-way and do-not-enter signs enhanced with LEDs or other similar enhanced visibility features at that intersection of 64 and 40. And it'll also ask that additional studies and feasibilities and effectiveness studies be done to see what intersections need better wrong-way signage and perhaps even the use of technology to alert law enforcement that there's a wrong-way driver. And so I've got here with me Dawn, Alex's mother. I'd ask this committee call her first, if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman. I've also got Alex's uncle, Keith, if you could call him second. And then I've got a representative with MAD, Heather Elder, here, if she could come last. Each of these witnesses are familiar with the time sensitivity and that we got a lot going on, and they intend on respecting that very much with brief comments. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Questions for the sponsor? Seeing none, if the family wants to hop up here first, and you can proceed when you're ready, and if you don't mind filling out a witness form for our records, appreciate it. Yeah, you can both come up here. There's 2 microphones there. You guys can proceed when you're ready. We do need a witness form for each one of you. And thanks for being here today.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today. My name is Dawn Whalen, and I am here as a grieving mother, heartbroken beyond words, but standing before you with the hope that no other family will have to endure what mine has. On January 17th, 2025, my son, Alexander Whalen, was killed in a horrific wrong-way crash on westbound I-64. He was 29 years old, a kind, compassionate, brilliant young man who was simply driving, just like any of us might, when in an instant his future was stolen. And so was mine, and so was my family's. There are no words to describe what it feels like to answer the front door and see 2 police officers standing before you, and to learn your child will never be coming home again. This kind of pain comes with that moment is beyond anything I could have ever imagined. It's not just the loss of his physical presence, it's the loss of every dream he had, every plan he had made, every hug, every holiday, every birthday that will now pass without him. I could have never imagined that this would happen to my family. My kids were safe. I watched them. I knew where they were. Even at 29 years old, I was in daily contact with Alex. Alex wasn't a risk taker, and every time he talked about moving out of our home, I would talk to him to please stay home, save your money, invest, pay your car off. You can watch the dogs for us when we're out of town. He lived a very safe life. Alexander was more than a victim. He was a son, a brother, a friend, and I loved him. He had hopes of building a life on a piece of land that overlooked the river in Callaway County, a place he loved dearly. Now on this land, I plan to place a bench in his honor, but I don't want his memory to end there. That's why I'm here to support the Alexander Whalen Safe Highways Act, Senate Bill 672, a bill that calls for the installation of wrong-way driving alert systems on Missouri highways. We have the technology, we have the data, and we know that wrong-way crashes occur, and when they do, most often they are disproportionately deadly. And we know that in these cases, these tragedies could be prevented if there were faster detection and timely alerts. We also know that other states are utilizing this technology, and it has proven to save lives. This isn't just about my son. This is about every person who travels on Missouri roads. Mothers driving their kids to school, young adults heading to work, grandparents visiting families. They all deserve to get to their destinations safely. My family has been shattered. We are learning to live with an emptiness that can never be filled. I believe that Alexander's legacy can be one of life, not just of loss. By passing Senate Bill 672, we can take a meaningful step to save lives and spare others from families from this kind of devastation. I urge you not just look at the data, but at the human lives behind every number. Alexander should be here today. But if his story can prevent one more tragedy, then maybe some small piece of pain can serve a greater purpose. Thank you for your time, your compassion, and your commitment to making Missouri roads safer. Please honor Alexander's memory by ensuring that his death leads to change that protects other families from experiencing the heartbreak that now defines ours. Thank you.
Good job. Let me see if any of the folks on the committee would like to ask you any questions before we get to the next. Senator Schnelton, go ahead.
Thank you for being here.
And
Just
if you want to
make a
use that microphone again, I'm sorry, just
to make a comment, Mr. Chair, I appreciate the fact that you're here. We can't, on behalf of the committee, we cannot express our sorrow enough on your behalf. We're very sorry for your loss. The fact that you're here so soon after your loss speaks volumes about your character, and we're going to work on this, and we want you to know that you're going to continue to be in our thoughts and prayers.
Thank you.
any other questions for the witness? Thank you, ma'am. Next witness. Fair Bill.
Yes, I'm Keith Smart. I'm Alex Whalen's uncle. And I've been a resident of Missouri for 48 years. I'm just here to support my sister Dawn Whalen and to support this Act 672.
Where are you from, sir?
Callaway County.
Any questions for this witness? Appreciate you guys. You know, I represent Callaway County, so it's incredibly meaningful that that's part of the story to me personally. And so thanks for being here today.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anybody else here to testify in favor? And I think Senator Gregory had some order. Are we going in the order, Senator, that you were requesting? We're good? Okay. Please proceed when you're ready.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Heather Elder, and I am a Victim Services Specialist for Mothers Against Drunk Driving, also known as MAD. I'm here to express MAD's support for Senate Bill 672, also known as the Whalen Safe Highways Act. I represent, sadly, thousands of victims and survivors who have been impacted by drunk and drug driving. This legislation represents a critical step forward in our ongoing efforts to reduce the devastating impact of impaired driving in Missouri through strengthening Missouri laws and calling attention to wrong-way and wrong-way impaired drivers. This bill is a long-awaited step forward in our collective efforts to identify room for improvement in Missouri laws. This bill will implement tools to send real-time alerts to law enforcement of wrong-way drivers where the technology has been placed, thus saving countless and unknown numbers of lives. Every 39 minutes across the United States, someone is killed by an impaired driver. In Missouri, over the last 10 years, 41,097 people have been killed or injured in an impaired driving crash, according to the Missouri State Highway Patrol STARS crash reporting system. That is 11 people killed or injured per day over the last 10 years in Missouri alone. It is time to toughen laws across the board. In 2022, 15 fatalities and 61 injuries were caused due to an impaired wrong-way driver. In 2023, 8 fatalities and 51 injuries were caused due to an impaired wrong-way driver. By reducing the instances of wrong-way impaired driving due to the implementation of signage and alerts, Missouri can help prevent the tragic loss of life and the emotional and financial burden to victims, their families, and that the state endures. Senate Bill 672 represents a proactive approach to safeguarding our communities and ensuring that fewer families experience the heartache associated with wrong-way and wrong-way impaired driving, such as the Whalen family has had to endure. Thank you for your attention to this bill and for your dedication to creating a safer Missouri for all.
Questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you for
Thank
your
you.
testimony. Anybody else here to testify in favor of Senate Bill 672? Anybody here to testify in opposition? Anyone for informational purposes only? Hearing none. Senator, I think what we'll do is we'll probably vote this out, and then let's figure out a way if we can get this substitute attached to our transportation omnibus. I think we'd all be kind of interested in figuring out a path for it. So we will vote it out next week. So it'll come out of this committee. Thank you, Senator. Any closing remarks? Great. That'll conclude the hearing on Senate Bill 672. The next bill we'll go to is House Committee Substitute for House Bill 1175. Representative Hardwick, proceed when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Bill Hardwick, State Representative. I represent House District 121, and I'm presenting House Bill 1175, which reenacts the Second Amendment Preservation Act. A brief history on what had happened. In 2021, the Missouri legislature enacted the Second Amendment Preservation Act. It went into effect, and there were some subsequent lawsuits and court cases. And recently, the Eighth Circuit had struck it down, holding that while Missouri could withhold material aid from the federal government, it cannot declare certain acts, federal acts, as infringements, as invalid, as violations of the Constitution. So it struck down our 2021 Second Amendment Preservation Act. And so now we have a new law before us. This is a proposal that I have to kind of address what the Eighth Circuit had held and then reenact what I think is a substantive provision at the heart of the Second Amendment Preservation Act. And the way that it solves it is the bill before you, instead of saying 1, 2, 3, 4 we find to be infringements or violations of the Constitution, the prohibition is on police officers in Missouri from enforcing federal gun laws, with some exceptions, right? There's exceptions that if they find violations ancillary to working with federal law enforcement and 570, 571 or an AB felony, but otherwise enforcing federal gun laws, they incur a penalty for that. And so I do want to make clear also that this bill doesn't change any law enforcement's ability to enforce any Missouri state criminal law whatsoever. So unlawful use of a weapon, armed criminal action, which is pretty broad in itself, assault charges, murder charges, stealing, burglary offenses, anything involving weapons in Missouri books, Missouri police officers can enforce that. But what they can't do is they can't be conscripts of the federal government. If you think about the implications of what I'm saying there, State prosecutors don't have jurisdiction to file federal charges at any rate. There's not original jurisdiction. But there might be cooperation with law enforcement or enticement with money to join a task force that enforces a federal firearms law regulation that's not on the books in Missouri. An example of that might be a federal firearms registry, right? If there's a federal firearms registry, it's my position that the Missouri Highway Patrol, that city police officers, that county sheriffs should not participate in registering and numbering and putting our guns into a database. I think it would be inappropriate and that there should be a law against it. Another example might be restrictions on holding amount of ammunition or magazines of certain ammunition. That's not against the law in Missouri, but there's a federal rule against it. I don't think Missouri police officers should enforce that. I think it should be against the law. So I think that the reason why this bill is very important to me, it's not just the Second Amendment, it's about the separation of powers of the 10th Amendment. Everything not enumerated to the federal government, and there's a list of things in Article 1 that the Congress has enumerated to them. Everything not enumerated, the remainder of that goes to the people and goes to the states, right? The state power. And so I think the state does have the ability under the Constitution, as the Eighth Circuit held, to withhold aid and say, we're not going to enforce these types of federal laws that we think are in violation of the Constitution. And I also think our state has a duty to assert that and to protect the rights of its citizens. And so with that, I'll close to see if there are any questions.
Questions? Senator Washington.
Hi, thanks for being here, Representative. I just have a couple of quick questions. You made a comment about state prosecutors cannot, can you repeat that?
A state prosecutor cannot file a federal charge.
Do you know where a majority of the federal charges come from?
Federal charges are filed by U.S. attorneys, by U.S. prosecutors.
But where do they come from?
Most of federal criminal law is in 18 U.S.C. That's the bulk of
Okay, so
federal
you don't know. So I'll help you. Have you been a police officer in the past?
I've been a state and federal prosecutor in the past.
You were a prosecutor?
I was a federal prosecutor and
Where were you a prosecutor at?
I was a assistant or U.S. attorney in the Western District, and I was a state.
Oh, that's good, because that's where I live. And so when I was a Jackson County prosecutor, oftentimes we would refer those cases to the feds. Is it not? It wasn't done like that when you were there?
There are jurisdiction that overlaps. So there's some law.
No, this wasn't an overlap. If we didn't feel comfortable in the case, or we felt there was a stronger case with the feds, we send it over with the state, we send it over to the feds. And vice versa, especially with felon with a firearm, they send them to us when all the T's are not crossed and all the I's are not dotted. Was that not your experience?
For a transaction of facts, there might be a federal crime against it, and there might be a state crime against it. But a state prosecutor cannot file a charge unless it's against the law in Missouri. They couldn't do that; they'd be thrown immediately.
I didn't say they filed it, but you said they can't prosecute. And when did you work there? Because you may have had some of my friends were there.
I was. It was like 2015, 2000. I was.
So was people that were on loan from the Jackson County Prosecutor's Office, were they there with you?
I don't remember that. No, I was.
Okay, you don't remember Stephen Hughes or Jalila Otto or people like that?
No, I worked with the Springfield office primarily.
Okay. So you all didn't do that in Greene County?
Well, what I said was true. A state prosecutor cannot file a federal charge.
Right, but that's not what you said. So I'm a lawyer too, so we got to deal with the exact. Second question is, who does the investigations on the cases that end up with the feds in the first place? What law enforcement agencies do that?
Well, it's so there are some times when state law enforcement help federal. There are task forces. I don't think the task forces that I think should be allowed are prohibited by this.
But what about if it's not a task force?
There are certain times when that state and federal law enforcement work together. And I think under this bill...
Are there times when the local law enforcement just makes that referral to the feds like they do to and then the federal office would make the decision as to whether to prosecute just as they would a county prosecutor?
Certainly, they certainly can.
Okay, how does this affect them doing that?
They could still have a cooperation with the state and feds. You could say, hey, this is a law that was broken. But what you couldn't do is offer material aid in enforcing federal firearms laws, right, with the feds. You couldn't do things. You couldn't offer your manpower. You couldn't offer ability to go in and confiscate, things like that. So
okay, so
aid.
In the initial bill, I don't know if I haven't gone back through yours, does it also prevent state-to-state cooperation as well? When we did this before, we prevented state to state, like Missouri couldn't work with Kansas authorities.
The prohibition applies to federal statutes, rules for firearms, magazines, accessories, and ammunition.
Okay, I got to go. I would, stay on you, but thank you.
Any other questions for the sponsor? Senator Weber, go ahead.
Could you elaborate? I'm very concerned about criminalizing law enforcement for following federal law. Could you elaborate exactly how that would work?
Well, it's not a criminal penalty because we haven't created a criminal penalty. This is a misdemeanor, a felony, right? So back in 2021, there was an original version of the bill that would hold officers individually liable. And the compromise that was struck that year was that the individual officer wouldn't be liable, but it would be the political subdivision or the law enforcement agency that could be sued, and there would be a civil liability of up to $50,000. So it's not criminalized, but I think that it is important to say if you break the law, there is some penalty. And that may be important for law enforcement departments also to be able to tell their federal counterparts, the reason why I can't do this thing that you want me to do is because there is a state law with some type of penalty, but it's not criminalized, no.
Okay, so we would just be forcing law enforcement to choose whether they want to work with federal law enforcement or whether they want to open themselves up to liability and being sued by Missouri citizens.
Well, I think that what we're doing is we're defining boundaries on the jurisdiction of state law enforcement, which is an appropriate function for us. And to that point before, so if there was a state arrest and they were trying to find, you held somebody in jail for more than 24 hours and you're holding them on a federal grounds and there wasn't a state law, there wasn't a state crime, I think in those cases, those officers might be subject to a 1983 civil rights lawsuit, right? Because your jurisdiction is your state jurisdiction, even though you might be able to call or talk or we might be able to refer cases if the transaction of facts has a federal charge associated with it. Our state police officers still can't violate their state jurisdiction. And I think that's important to reinforce.
And then that's a fancy way, I think, of saying you're complicating law enforcement's life. The last question, I guess, would just be, I know there's some talk about Trump removing funding from sanctuary cities. Are you in favor of that?
I think that sanctuary cities for illegal immigration is a whole lot different than this bill. There's companies
this bill goes a lot further than that, right?
I think that,
they're just saying don't participate. This is saying there's actually a penalty if you do participate. So this is significantly further than what quote sanctuary cities do.
I think there are
right?
a couple differences. One is there is a constitutional right to keep and bear arms. There's not a constitutional right to be in the country illegally. That we're talked about the difference between enumerated powers and the residual powers to the states. Foreign affairs, including the political boundaries and who comes to the country, is an enumerated power of Congress. Criminal.
This is a fancy way of saying it. You want to have it both ways, don't you?
Well, I think that there should be enforcement.
You want there to be a penalty if they don't enforce immigration law, but you want to create a penalty if they do enforce gun law.
Yeah, I think that we should enforce immigration laws, but there should also be a penalty that if you are ordered by feds to take firearms from law-abiding citizens, there's some punishment for that, yes.
Okay. I think we all know where everybody's at, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Further questions for the sponsor? Seeing none, anybody here to testify in support of House Committee Substitute for House Bill 1175? Hop on up here. Proceed when you're ready.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Aaron Dorr, Missouri Firearms Coalition. On behalf of our members, we're in full support of HB1175. This is the bill that passed out of the House about 2 weeks ago with broad support. It's about a 10-page long bill, but only 5 pages are actually new legislation. Of that, only a few paragraphs contain substantial changes from what passed in 2021. A couple of changes the House made I want to draw your attention to. Page 3, line 4, the House added against law-abiding citizens to the bill to kind of clarify and give clarity as to who is covered by the Second Amendment Preservation Act. On page 4, line 15, the House added the phrase $50,000 per employee hired. That deals with a section about penalties against a jurisdiction that hires a former federal officer who knowingly violated or enforced a federal gun control law. This deals with the concern we heard from law enforcement about open-ended and spurious lawsuits. It caps it at $50,000 per incident. And finally, on page 5, line 35, the House added section 5, which clarifies that former military can certainly still be hired as law enforcement officers in the state of Missouri. You've heard a lot about what SAPA is about. There's a lot of hysterics about what SAPA is going to do. I'm going to discuss what SAPA does not do, just to provide some clarity to the committee. SAPA does not preclude federal aid from being received by Missouri law enforcement agencies for the enforcement of Missouri law. All material aid can be received by by Missouri from the federal government for purposes of enforcing federal law. That would include money, database work, manpower, my personal favorite, a black helicopter or two. All of these things can be brought in. No one even laugh at that. All these things can be brought in to help enforce Missouri law. We're simply saying that Missouri cops will not be allowed to help the feds enforce federal gun control laws. We've heard a lot about the inability of using databases, for example. That is not in SAPA. SAPA allows local law enforcement to use all of these databases. We simply cannot help the feds when they ask us to help them enforce federal gun control law. That section that deals with that is on page 3, line 5 and 6. That's the material aid section. Page 4, line 15, a separate concern we hear a lot about is that SAPA is going to lead to all kinds of spurious lawsuits. It's going to bankrupt municipalities. It's going to be used to punish these jurisdictions. A couple thoughts on that. First of all, that didn't happen during the 2 years that we had SAPA on the books here in Missouri, or if it did, there was a handful of lawsuits. There was not this unending stream of litigation. Secondly, as I mentioned in the House, they clarified that section by saying that the penalties are capped at $50,000 per offense, per employee hired. So there's no way to have an open-ended situation with Missouri's SAPA law. We've heard a lot about how SAPA precludes Missouri cops from doing their jobs and precludes Missouri cops from enforcing from putting bad guys in jail. Just want to clarify this. I can't speak for the sponsor, but I can speak for our members. Nobody wants to make it easier for bad guys to roam the streets. Nobody wants to make it harder to put bad guys in jail. Our concern here, the very real concern, is the future enforcement of federal gun control laws. So to that end, if you look at the bill on page 5, lines 12 through 15, it makes it clear that Missouri cops can help the feds, even if guns are involved, if they're ancillary to the case, if the person in question is not a citizen of Missouri. So we heard a lot about, will this deny law enforcement's ability to help President Trump, for example, deport certain persons? No, it will not, because they're not law-abiding citizens in Missouri. We heard a lot about the concern about putting bad guys in jail if guns are involved. Page 5, line 18 through 20, says that our cops can help the feds even if a gun is involved, if it's ancillary to the case, if the underlying infraction is similar to Missouri Code 571, our weapons sections. Same thing on page 5, line 21 through 24. Missouri cops can help the feds, even if firearms are involved, if the violation is similar to Code Section 579, felony narcotics distribution. So there is all kinds of ways we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We can protect gun rights and still ensure law enforcement can do their job. We believe that's what HB1175 does. We'd ask you to move the bill as soon as possible. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions for this witness? Seeing none. Thank you for testimony. Anybody else here to testify in favor of the House bill?
Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. Susan Myers of the 20th, here in support of HB 1175. I volunteer as Missouri's State Director for Women for Gun Rights, whose mission is to safeguard and restore the Second Amendment. Safeguard and restore. It is much easier to protect something that is already in your possession than it is to try and get it back once it has been taken from you. Here in Missouri, the Second is pretty safe right now from the threat of new infringement being enacted by the state. But man, oh man, when it comes to trying to restore the rights of female gun owners, that is a frustrating, never-ending uphill climb, sadly taking years, even a decade now, in the case of public transit carry, to see any progress achieved. It's difficult to claw back or restore what legislators had no right to take away, dare I say, even when they know it to be an infringement. SAPA is one layer of safeguarding that Missouri can and should utilize to protect her citizens' unalienable rights from federal overreach. There's no guarantee that the ATF will stop reinterpreting their rules to eke out more gun control, resulting in Missourians becoming felons overnight for violating not a law enacted by Congress, but rather simply a bureaucrat's disingenuous twisting of a rule. The new DOJ asked for a pause of ongoing Second Amendment cases to give them time to re-examine the stance taken by the government under Biden. Will they ultimately switch their position to side with 2A plaintiffs in any of these cases? Unfortunately, so far, there hasn't been much sign of that, as seen in our own state. Even with presumed pro-2A electeds in charge, restoring rights once they've been stripped away is just so gosh darn hard for government to do. We should be safeguarded from whatever comes out of DC that we don't like. Sure, the feds will still be able to enforce, but Missouri is under no obligation to assist. In fact, I believe the opposite to be true. Both the U.S. and Missouri Constitution compel our rights be protected. We can and should deter and publicly admonish any federal overreach. I encourage you to safeguard the second by utilizing the 10th. And I'll keep working on you to get our own state statutes in line with the Second Amendment of the Constitution as well. Thank you.
Any questions for this witness? Hearing none, thank you for your testimony. Anybody else here to testify in favor? Seeing none, anybody here to testify in opposition?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I am an unlikely witness in opposition to 1175. My name is Ron Calzone. I'm one of the directors of Missouri First. And I've been working hard since at least 2013, really 2012 when we first started drafting the original SEPA, to get it passed and to protect it. Unfortunately, I have to testify against this bill for at least 3 reasons. I'll give you my 15-second summary and then I'll go into more detail. The first reason is House Bill 1175 actually expands the scope of SEPA. It expands the scope of SEPA beyond that which it was originally designed to do. It goes beyond just federal infringements on the right to bear arms. It'll forbid state involvement in federal activities that are perfectly legitimate. I'll expand on that in a minute. It changes SEPA enough to result in what I think might be a reset of the ongoing litigation. So right now, we have an opportunity to get this before SCOTUS, before the Supreme Court of the United States. And I think this may push the reset button, and so we lose all of that litigation that we've done so far. The third thing is the title of the bill is left wide open. The title of the bill is left open enough to result in what I think might be harm to the original SEPA. So I'll be brief, but let me elaborate on each of those 3 points. The 2021 version of SEPA only forbade state involvement in federal laws we considered to harm the right to keep and bear arms. Missouri citizens were protected by that from federal infringement on their right to keep and bear arms. But 1175 applies to all federal laws, quote, regarding firearms. You'll see that phrase, regarding firearms, in at least 3 different places in the bill. One of those places maybe has been somewhat fixed, but I don't think well enough. So there could be future federal laws, and there are currently federal laws that actually enhance or protect the right to keep and bear arms. And they would be negatively affected by this bill because it's broadening the scope of SEPA. For instance, there's something called the Civilian Marksmanship Program. It was designed as a national defense effort to prepare civilians to ward off invasion and better prepare young people for military service. They conduct something called the Camp Perry shoot each year. It's a long-range rifle shoot. That's what that entity does. And right now it's been kind of somewhat privatized, but it still is part of a federal program that's enhanced or enabled by federal laws. Right now, as we speak, there's something called the National Concealed Carry Reciprocity Act working its way through Congress. Now, I don't know that Missouri needs national reciprocity because right now I think we've got pretty good reciprocity with other states. But that's an example of something that's good that's coming out of the federal government. It doesn't happen very often where 2A rights are concerned, but that's something good. But consider where it says that we cannot participate in the enforcement or the enactment or anything to do with anything regarding firearms. The Second Amendment itself is regarding firearms. And so this bill would not allow Missouri employees to defend the Second Amendment, to defend citizens' rights under the Second Amendment. So because it expands the scope of SAPA, it changes everything. It changes everything. And because that's a substantive change, I think it also will result in what courts will consider to be a reset on the case. So right now, the Missouri Attorney General has a petition for cert before the Supreme Court. And we are waiting now for the new DOJ to issue an answer to A.G. Bailey's request for that cert. They've asked for an extension twice now. And so it was due, their answer was due last Friday. They've asked for another 2-week extension. My hope is that with all of the Missouri representation that we have in the Trump government, including the Trump DOJ, our former Solicitor General is now, as of the 3rd, I think, of April, the new Solicitor General for the DOJ. He argued in support of SAPA, and now he's not going to, I can't imagine, take the same stance that the Biden DOJ did. So I think that we don't want to do anything that might result in judges saying that this issue is moot because we changed SAPA. Let's let the Supreme Court case play itself out. And then the last thing I want to talk about is the fact that the title of the bill allows, although it's tighter than a typical title, that title will not protect SAPA from, for instance, will not protect an amendment from eliminating all the enforcement provisions in SAPA, basically taking the teeth out of SAPA. So I'm concerned about the substance of the bill, I'm concerned about what it might do to our ongoing litigation, and I'm concerned about the fact that this SAPA may come out of the Senate a lot weaker than the original SAPA.
What do you, Ron, Mr. Calzone, what do you think the timeline is for the court proceedings?
Well, the AG asked for the Supreme Court to take up the case, cert, and the DOJ asked for an extension on that time that coincided with Trump's taking control of the White House. And so then the Attorney General of Missouri then filed, they filed that request. They asked for an extension so that they could actually file their petition for cert on the 23rd or 2nd or somewhere about the time the Trump administration. The DOJ had 30 days to answer. After 30 days, they asked for an extension. They got a 2-week extension. They asked for another extension just last Friday, and they got another 2-week extension. So that's when we'll know whether or not the DOJ has changed, the Trump DOJ has changed their opinion relative to the Biden DOJ. That will not tell us what the Supreme Court does with it. But I will say this. It takes 4 Supreme Court judges to grant cert. We know we've gotten good indications from 3 of them that seem to support SAPA. So we just need one more Supreme Court judge to say, this is important enough, let's take it up.
Well, I think, and I've had many conversations with the Senate sponsor of this, that's on the radar, the discussion on where it is in the court proceedings. We just want to have maximum flexibility as it pertains to getting something accomplished eventually, but without getting in the way of the court battle that's happening also.
And I initially was in favor of that tact, but the fact is that the way the bill ended up being drafted and expanding the scope of SAPA and creating what I think are untold unintended consequences, what else? So as an example, the House did fix what would have been a problem, so the way SAPA was originally, the way 1175 and the Senate bill is currently drafted, there's a pretty good argument to say that law enforcement agencies would not have been able to hire former military individuals, people that served in the military. And so on page 5, line 35, you see that something was put in there to fix it. That was an unintended consequence that was identified. But what other unintended consequences might there be because we've expanded the scope of SAPA from infringements on the right to keep and bear arms to anything related to firearms?
Gotcha. Any questions for the witness? Hearing none, thank you for your testimony.
May I just add this?
Yeah.
The House sponsor is my good friend, and it really pains me. He's a brilliant guy. I support almost everything he does, and it pains me to have to come here, and we've talked about this ad nauseum. It pains me to have to come and testify against his bill. And,
Thanks for that caveat.
Yeah,
Yeah, you
okay.
guys can hug later. Anybody else?
no, but we'll still shake hands,
Anybody else who
We've never
testify in
had-
opposition?
just for the record.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Sean Fagan. I am Chief of Police for the City of Rolla. I am also on the board of the Law Enforcement Legislation Coalition, as well as the Missouri Police Chiefs. I'm here to testify today to some of the language in this bill. But before I do, let me just state that I am an avid supporter of the Second Amendment. I've been a policeman for 43 years, and I have always been a supporter. I've been a competitive shooter. I still am today. So I firmly believe that every law-abiding citizen in the state of Missouri should be allowed and should own firearms. But with that being said, I'd like to speak a moment about this bill as it was filed. It has language that allows frivolous litigation against police officers and law enforcement agencies, specifically portions where police departments cannot recoup their attorney's fees and where the bill eliminates sovereign immunity. Let me just give you an example to the original bill. When the original bill was filed, my police department was a member of the South Central Drug Task Force. That task force was run by the Missouri State Highway Patrol. And in that task force, we had 2 DEA agents that worked for our task force. When this was filed, at the request of my city attorney, we had to immediately withdraw from that task force for fear of being involved in litigation. I was also the chairman of the board for that task force at the time, and I had to resign my position. Just recently, we now have our own drug unit that does not involve any federal agencies, but recently our drug unit was able to identify a very large narcotics dealer that was dealing drugs, shipping them into Phelps County where we work. These officers worked this case for 2 years. This case was adopted by the FBI and the DEA, with my 2 officers still being the lead officers. We obtained a federal search warrant in Kansas City. We served that search warrant, and over 700 pounds of methamphetamine, 700 pounds of methamphetamine, 2 kilos of fentanyl, thousands of pills, and 4 firearms were seized. The 2 people that were arrested, one of which was a cartel member from Mexico, but the other one was a resident of Kansas City, Missouri. Now, if this bill was to pass, we would not have been able to do that because it was adopted by the, like I said, the FBI, and it was turned into a federal case. It was filed through the U.S. attorney. Thank God right now that this is not yet part of the legislation. When the original one passed, he said that there was no lawsuits filed. When the original one passed, I was contacted as the chief of police and as the chairman for the South Central Drug Task Force by a attorney in Kansas City, Missouri, requesting a copy of every report that involved a firearm that our task force was involved in or that my personal police officers were involved in. I have no doubt that they were searching for a lawsuit that they could present. Thank God that the bill was struck down in court before any of that litigation went forward. Currently, right now, there are between 80 and 100 police departments that are participating in task forces. These task forces usually always have some kind of a federal agency involved in them. They're not a federal task force, but they have either a DEA or an FBI agent involved in those. A lot of times, if the case is big enough, it will be adopted by those federal agencies. Those cases are narcotics cases, and usually when you have narcotics, you have firearms involved in them as well. And if it is adopted by the federal case, SAPA bill would make it to where lawsuits could be filed against the police departments. Now, as I said, I've been a policeman for 43 years. I'm an avid supporter of the Second Amendment, but in my profession, there is wording in this that really gives me pause and that I hope that you look at. It's going to be something that is going to hurt police departments. It's going to take away some of the teeth that we have in our task forces and our drug enforcement. So I am just asking that you look at the impact that, if passed, that this bill will have on our law enforcement. Thank you.
Any questions for the chief? Senator Brown, go ahead.
It's not so much a question, but a comment. But Chief, you're my chief of police from my hometown, and I just want to thank you for your service and tell you that you're doing a great job there.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Anybody else here to testify in opposition? And please make sure you fill out a witness form for our records.
Hello, I'm Lance Bollinger. I'm the Assistant Police Chief of the Columbia, Missouri Police Department. I've been with the police department coming up on 20 years. When the Second Amendment Preservation Act was passed in 2021, I was the lieutenant over our Special Investigations Division. And I think when that passed, I think there was a lot of good intentions, but I do want to talk about the unintended consequences that we faced at that time. So as part of the Special Investigations Division for the Columbia Police Department, I supervised our Narcotics Division, I supervised our Street Crimes Division, and I supervised all of our federal task forces. And when that law passed the last time, we got summoned up to the ATF office, the field office out of Kansas City. And I met with a special agent in charge at the Kansas City office. All of the Kansas City ranking police officers were there. All the KC Metro police officers were there. All the attorneys from all of the agencies. And regardless of what the intentions are when we pass these laws, it's how the attorneys for the police departments interpret them. That's what really matters, because what that did for us is it pretty much shut down all of our federal assistance. So what came out of that meeting, and I'm going to quote the Kansas City Police Department's attorney. They said, as a result of sappers, we're going to be takers, not givers in our relationship with the federal government. Meaning we'll take whatever resources you want to give us, but we're not going to give any resources back. As a result, locally in mid-Missouri at the Columbia Police Department, we had a task force that was formed consisting of members from the Boone County Sheriff's Department, Columbia Police Department, the ATF, MUPD, and they were designed to really go after people that were committing violence with guns in our community. As a result, that task force was completely disbanded. At that time, we had a NIBIN machine that was funded by the ATF. So what a NIBIN machine is, essentially collects intelligence on shell casings we locate at the scene. So if we locate a shell casing at the scene, it's a fingerprint that's going to be collected from that shell casing, right? It's unique to each gun. If I fired a gun off in this room right now, a shell casing would be expended. We put that shell casing into the machine, and as a result, it will tell you that that gun that I had in my possession fired that casing. That's a huge benefit for us, because here locally, this weekend in Columbia, we had over 100 different shell casings that were dropped on our city. Trying to put those pieces together and figure out what gun fired what shell casing is going to be impossible without that technology. That technology is proprietary to the federal government. So if we lose the access to provide them with information, we lose the intelligence we gain on the backside of that. That's a huge loss for us. The worst part of this, though, is it really damaged our relationship with federal agencies. We had a federal task force officer who was in charge of that. That was a member of the ATF. We had him running that task force at that time. As a result of that, he not only lost access to the task force, we weren't even allowing him unescorted access into our building as a result of the SAPA being passed the last time. If he wanted to walk in our building, we were having him supervise our people. To walk into our building, he had to be escorted by a police officer. I think that that law really set us back decades in Columbia, Missouri. And I've heard said multiple times, we want our law, said by our lawmakers, that we want our law enforcement focusing on state laws, not federal laws. Well, I understand that and I appreciate that. One of the things that I've seen, though, is we've arrested subjects in Columbia, Missouri on homicides. And the homicide that comes to mind most of the times when I think of this is we had a drive-by shooting where a young girl was shot and killed in a car as she was driving down the roadway. That suspect got 7 years in prison in DOC under our state laws for murder. 7 years DOC. If you look at that on the same side of that, if we arrest somebody that we know is a violent felon for a felon in possession and charge them on the federal system, they're going to get a 10-year minimum in federal custody. That's why it's a huge benefit for us in law enforcement to be able, we talk about identifying the people that are committing the crime and focusing on those people. When we lose those federal gun laws and the right to enforce federal laws, that really it makes us less effective. One of the other assistant chiefs that I work with, he told me to just play the video from the Cosmo Park shooting this weekend for you guys to hear it. It's 42 seconds of about 100 shell casings of all different types of guns being fired. It's just over and over and over and over again. There's 400 people at the scene of Cosmo Park. It's our biggest park. There were kids there all day throughout the day. Over 400 casings got dumped on that, or over 100 casings got dumped on that property. I think that the gun problem that we're encountering is just, it is out of control. After that, shots fired happened down at Cosmo Park. An hour later in our downtown area, right where all the university kids go to hang out at 1 o'clock in the morning, we had another 20 to 30 shots that rang out down there. When our police officers showed up at the scene, they were taking fire from the suspects who were still down there at the scene. It is out of control, and when we damage the relationships between the federal and state law enforcement, no one wins in that. And what I mean by that is, from the state side, we bring the manpower. From the federal side, they bring the resources. There are only 2 federal agents for 13 counties in central Missouri. I don't know if you all know that. So the ATF has 2 federal agents that cover 13 counties. They're not going to be able to enforce federal firearm laws. So if we take away the state law enforcement officers to enforce that, they just won't get investigated. That just will not happen, and we take a huge tool out of our toolbox that we can't afford to lose. Thank you.
Questions for this witness? Senator Weber, go ahead.
So you served Columbia, my hometown, where I grew up. I grew up playing at Cosmo Park as a kid every single Saturday morning for the first 18 years of my life.
Absolutely.
And I just want to say I really appreciate. I know you have a really tough job. I know the town's a difficult town to keep safe, and I just want to say thank you for all the work that you've done, that you're doing, and for being here today. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Anybody else here to testify in opposition? Go ahead and just hop up here.
Good afternoon. Thank you for allowing this. Chief Schmidt with the Branson Police Department and also a member of LELC. Touching on pretty much what the other two have already said, I just wanted to give you some real life examples of what we face down in Branson. As the previous speaker said, attorneys are going to go the most conservative route. As soon as the first SAPA passed, we had to remove our officer from the ATF task force and quit doing NIBIN and some of the other things that we do. Why does that impact us? That's what I want to really give you today. You already heard about the Fed time versus state time. We do routinely see better Fed time for felons in possession of firearms, things along those lines, and as I was already said, they go hand in hand with drug activity. What you may not know is for us in our area, We have over 10 million visitors a year. Unfortunately, not all 10 million are law-abiding. Bad guys read the same ads that everybody else does, and they come down. And unfortunately, our local prosecutor's office is not staffed to be able to deal with that. And so many times our cases would founder in the state system. And if we could refer them, or when we were able to refer them federally, we found that ATF was the fastest way for us to get bang for our buck for the same violations as Missouri state violations that supposedly we can enforce under this bill. We saw better returns on our investment by going through the ATF, even faster than going through DEA. It's just the way the system worked. We had taken a big impact in Branson when the first SAPA hit, and then my biggest concern is also stated as the frivolous lawsuits. I would like to see, if nothing else, some kind of common sense language that allows for the cities to recoup the attorney's fees when we're victorious in the frivolous lawsuit. Right now, it's prohibited. So there's risk only to the cities, not to the person that brings the lawsuit. And I've unfortunately been a cop for 34 years now, 27 of which are in Colorado, which is why I am in favor of the intent of this. I don't want to see us go Colorado route. However, we get sued by idiots all the time that are just mad at us for arresting them. And unfortunately, the way I read this, and I'm pretty sure my attorneys, the way they would read it, is if I submit a found gun through NIBIN or I recommend a case to the feds because we have a better chance of better prosecution there, but there's a technicality or a loophole in a very strong case, that person could come back just out of malice and sue us, and there's no risk to him. If he loses, he doesn't have to pay our attorney's fees. And so I would like to see something strengthened along that line so there's skin in the game on both sides, the way that goes. But again, the ability for us to work with the feds on certain firearms cases and drug cases because they involve firearms, I don't want to see that disappear, and I don't want to see our people told we can't even consider that, even though we may have a comparable Missouri law, we're not going to be able to maybe get the results that we could by going through the federal system. So however that can be polished up and still protect Second Amendment rights, I would love to see something along those lines. Thank you.
Questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Anybody else here to testify in opposition?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Sean Rhodes, registered lobbyist for Missouri Sheriffs United. Right now, as the bill stands, we testify in opposition to the bill. I know you got a lot to do.
Questions for the witness?
Thank you.
Seeing none? Anybody else here to testify in opposition?
Good afternoon, Chairman Fitzwater, committee members, and staff. Thank you for hearing my testimony today. My name is Joan Haven, and I am a lifelong resident of Missouri, having grown up on a farm in St. Charles County, and I have lived in the Chesterfield area of St. Louis County for the past 35 years. I have been a volunteer since 2018 with Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America. I am testifying today because House Bill 1175 is a dangerous bill that undermines federal firearm regulations by prohibiting state and local officials from enforcing certain federal laws, potentially creating a patchwork of enforcement that endangers public safety and hinders efforts to address gun violence effectively. My experience as a volunteer with the Gun Violence Prevention Group leads me to believe that House Bill 1175 will only hurt, not help, the people of Missouri. I frequently call new members joining our group, and many of them are young mothers. It is heartbreaking when these young mothers talk of trying to reassure a 10-year-old who wonders why some people bring guns to school. They don't know how to answer a 5-year-old who doesn't understand an active shooter drill. Our children shouldn't have to ask these questions. This bill would handcuff police officers in Missouri, a state that already has the 8th highest rate of gun deaths among all other states in the country. Many critical public safety efforts, like tracking interstate gun trafficking or addressing domestic terrorism, require partnerships between federal, state, and local authorities. House Bill 1175 sabotages this cooperation, making Missouri a potential haven for illegal activities. This bill imposes civil penalties on law enforcement for assisting in enforcing federal firearm laws, discouraging collaboration between local, state, and federal agencies, and crippling their ability to address illegal gun trafficking and organized crime. It imposes fines of $50,000 per violation against law enforcement agencies that hire a person who previously attempted to enforce a federal firearm law. This will limit the pool of qualified candidates to serve in our state and local agencies. Why wouldn't Missouri want the best qualified candidates to fill essential roles in our state and local agencies? I encourage members of the committee to vote no on House Bill 1175. This concludes my testimony. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here today.
Any questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Anybody else here to testify in opposition?
Good afternoon, Jay Schroeder, Missouri FOP, here to testify in opposition, but I'm sure we can get to a point that this bill will do what we need to do to keep policemen protected and keep the Second Amendment protected. So thank you.
Questions for this witness? Seeing none, anybody else here to testify in opposition? Go ahead and hop up here.
Chairman, members, Chad Hartman, Chief of Police for Sales, 31 years experience. I testify in opposition of this piece of legislation, not necessarily legislation, but some of the language in it. I think most of my colleagues have gone through and hit all the highlights, with the exception of maybe one. Several of our municipalities in the state of Missouri have certain insurance companies that cover their liability, their risks. And a lot of those attorneys are not allowing those agencies to enter firearms into the federal database when they're stolen. And simply because the language in this piece of legislation, in their minds and what their attorneys are telling them, is telling them they can't, because it is a violation of this piece of legislation. So I would like to encourage this body here to maybe look into some legislation changes with what we're working with to ensure that this piece of legislation would come out stronger, benefiting the Second Amendment, but also not hindering law enforcement from performing their duties. I mean, I'd hate to have my neighbor's firearm stolen and I can't enter their gun as a stolen firearm, and the criminal gets to get away free. Even if they find it a state away, we'll never know. So looking into that and different aspects of the legislation that the rest of my colleagues have spoke about would be greatly appreciated. Another short aspect of this is I know thousands of dollars have been spent in the courts fighting the last piece of legislation. It's still going from what I heard from testimony today. And the unconstitutionality, the possibilities of that with the current piece of legislation that we have is also very strong, and I feel that would cause a lot of undue costs on the taxpayers for a lot of municipalities or counties that have to go in and try to get this piece of legislation to where it's a constitutional piece. So that's my testimony.
Any questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Anybody else here to testify in opposition? Anybody for informational purposes only? Seeing none. Representative, any closing remarks?
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to present. I know we got a lot of discussion to continue to have, and I think that a bill that asserts the Constitution is very important, so thank you for the opportunity to present.
Yep. Thank you, Representative. Having no other business before the body, I make a motion to adjourn. Do I have a second? I have a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. We're adjourned.